Okay, we are on Chapter 1, The Tide Turns. In a narrow tunnel just below the sea level, Abby Lennox clung desperately to the tail of a moray eel. The eel was her younger brother Leo, and neither of them was happy. As Abby held her breath and tightened her grip on Leo's slimy body, they were both well aware that their present situation was just a small, unfortunate part of another bigger and nastier situation. Finding the tunnel in the first place had been nearly impossible. Its entrance was hidden underwater at the base of Yak Spike Island, an impenetrable mass of rock that jutted out of the ocean like a crumbling tombstone of an ancient giant. Now, as Leo struggled to propel himself onwards with the weight of Abby's body clinging behind him, he recalled the dying words of their friend Emerson Trimble. "Go to my island at low tide. You will find an underwater passageway. Take your sister. You will need each other to descend into the hidden grotto. You will discover all that you need to know." The memory of the time-worn scientist's final moments, just days earlier, made Leo shudder, and he shuddered away inside. He needed to focus if he was to stay turned and get them safely through the underwater tunnel. Abby surely couldn't hold her breath much longer. But Leo's mind was also fighting the inclination to slow down and search for fish to eat. This was always the case for brief minutes each day when he turned. It was a struggle to hold back the instincts of whatever animal he was turned into. And although he was better at it now than the first time he turned, on his 13th birthday in the school library when he turned into a Komodo dragon, he had not yet mastered it. In this case, turning into the moray eel had been a matter of life or death. His future, and indeed the future of all turners, depended upon him and Abby making it to the end of the underwater tunnel. This is why they'd taken the hazardous journey to Yak Spike Island in the first place. Until his untimely death, it had been Emerson Trimble's secluded hideaway, and it held all the secrets he had amassed during his hundreds of years as a turner. But today they were trying to penetrate a part of it they'd never known existed. They had left their father Vernon waiting back at Wharfport, a deserted fishing village that provided the closest access to Yak Spike Island. He had been reluctant to let them make the 5-kilometre trek out to sea without him, but they had reminded him that they'd done it once before, and that Emerson Trimble had specifically advised Leo and Abby to make the trip alone. In the late afternoon, after hours of kayaking around the island's sheer cliffs, Abby had finally discovered a narrow opening in the rocks below the waterline. "Look!" she had yelled over the ocean's endless roar. "A crevice!" Leo peered into the sloshing water. "I don't see any crevice." "Not a crevice," shouted Abby, as a wave broke over a kayak. "A crevasse!" Leo stared at the dark mossy shadow of the rocks below the sloshing waterline. "I don't see any crevasses or any crevices." At that moment the waves drew back, revealing the small opening of a cave in the rock. "There!" yelled Abby. "You sure that's it?" said Leo, peering in through the murky green water. "Trimble told us to find the underwater passageway," said Abby. "Do you see any other underwater passageways?" "I'm just saying." "Stop saying and start swimming." Leo pulled on his goggles and slid into the water. Despite the wetsuit he was wearing, the chill of the ocean water sucked the air from his lungs. Fighting the violent swell of the sea, he kicked down towards the cave and peered inside it. The entrance was tiny, virtually impossible for any normal person to squeeze through. "Luckily, I'm not normal," he thought, as he swam back up to the surface. Abby was struggling to keep the kayak from being swept away by the tide. "Good news!" shouted Leo, treading water and spitting seaweed from his mouth. "That is definitely a tunnel." "And," said Abby, pushing against the waves with the paddle. "And the bad news is that we're probably going to get our skin peeled off if we try to squeeze through the opening." Abby peered down at him for a moment. "Who said anything about we?" A wave smacked Leo in the face, stinging his eyes. "Aren't we both going in there?" "Pretty comfortable up here, actually," said Abby. "Anyway, you're the day turner." But Emerson Trimble said that we both needed to go find the hidden grotto. "And now that we've both found it, you're going to swim down there and check it out." "But—" Another splash of seawater hit Leo. "What are you waiting for?" said Abby. "Turn while it's still daytime." Abby's urgency was justified. Although she had the power to turn once each night like every other turner on Earth, Leo could turn only during the day, and today everything relied on his usual turn as well. The sun was close to setting on the horizon, which meant he didn't have long left. "Wait a minute," said Leo, closing his mouth as another wave fit his face. "What?" said Abby. "How do I get back out? If I return while I'm in this grotto place. I'll be too big to swim back out again. I'll get stuck in there." Before Abby could answer, the kayak was bashed up in the air, as if a bomb had detonated underneath it. Leo watched horrified as a giant bull shark rocketed from the water, flipping the kayak with the stub of its nose. Abby tumbled into the water next to Leo. In the same instant, he caught a sickening glimpse of the shark's cold black eyes as it crashed down into the waves, showering his face with water. Leo turned in a nanosecond. The first thing he saw through his moray eel eyes was the shark charging towards him underwater, its jaws wide, its teeth glistening. Just as it was about to clamp down on him, he swerved towards Abby, who was flailing desperately in the water, her long black hair billowing out around her like an oil slick. Leo shot between them, driven by an instinct that both commanded him and was commanded by him. He sank his razor-sharp teeth into the shark's closest fin, tearing away a chunk of rubbery white flesh. The shark thrashed back, stunned, but not deterred. Abby splashed frantically towards Leo and grabbed his long rippling tail. Leo shot towards the opening of the cave, towing Abby in his wake. His long body sliced through the narrow opening with ease, but he felt a jolt behind him as Abby got stuck between the rocks and lost her grip on his tail. He spiraled back down towards the cave opening as he heard Abby's underwater screams. She was wedged between the rocks, blood rippling from cuts all over her shoulders. Her backpack snagged. Leo rocketed through a tiny gap below her just in time to see the shark charging open-mouthed at her toes. Leo bit down hard on its dorsal fin. The shark jerked backwards just as it was about to snap its jaws around Abby's flesh, but Leo's parrying attack only made the shark angrier and it charged once more towards Abby's legs. Leo clamped his teeth down hard on the shark's tail fin and tore at it. The shark, which was on the verge of chomping off Abby's left foot, reeled backwards, thrashing aggressively. Abby scrambled through the cave opening, trailing blood in the water. Leo let go of the shark's tail and surged past it as it butted its nose against the rocks, unable to get its bulk into the tunnel. As he jetted past her, Leo could see Abby's eyes bulging. He flicked his tail against her hand and she grabbed it tightly. Leo weaved down and down and down and then upwards and then down again, twisting and turning. The tunnel opened out. All was black, but Leo's eel eyes could see a path in the darkness. They were charging upwards now, Abby's strong fingers digging into Leo's tail. Finally, they broke through the surface of the water and Leo landed with a wet thud on a small plateau of rock. Abby surged out of the water and arched over on her knees, retching seawater and taking great desperate gulps of air. Leo was gasping too, his mouth gaping but unable to draw in what he needed. He realized that he was drowning in the air. It was water he needed. His body whipped across the rock, its tail whacking Abby in the stomach. "Return, you idiot!" Abby spluttered, her voice hoarse. Leo's brain could not process what she was saying. He was panicked. He desperately tried to slither back into the water, but Abby was hauling him back onto the small plateau of rock with all her strength. "Return, you idiot!" she yelled, slapping his hand on his scaly hide. "You're still an eel." "Don't eat my book, Poppy." Leo's body twanged like an elastic band that had been stretched to its limits and suddenly released. He felt the coldness of the rock beneath him and heaved in a thick, glorious breath as his vision came back into focus, and he knew that he was himself again. Abby stared at him, her eyes wild, her body shivering. Streaks of crimson trailed from grazes all over her sinewy limbs. Her wet hair clung to her face and neck. Leo became aware of something rough and rubbery in his mouth. He bit down and immediately regretted it. Whatever it was, it felt impossibly chewy, like a big piece of gristle. He spat it out at once, wondering if he'd bitten his own tongue. He and Abby stared at the whitish chunk as it landed on the rock with a plop. It had perfectly curved lines of teeth marks around the edges. "Flake," said Abby. "Flake?" said Leo, looking at her questioningly. "Raw shark," she explained, "before it's cooked. Usually it's battered and deep-fried and served with chips." "Man," said Leo, gagging, "why do bad things happen every time I grow a tail?" And that is the end of chapter 1. Our next chapter is going to be called An Epic Fail.